What happened to Emily Pike? 2025's most disturbing unsolved crime. She was 14 years old. She walked away from her group home in Mesa, Arizona, and vanished. Weeks later, her body was found wrapped in trash bags, her hands missing on the side of a highway. No suspects, no justice. This is the story of Emily Pike and how America failed her. One of the most recent and disturbing unsolved murder cases in the United States is the killing of Emily Pike, a 14-year-old Native American girl from the San Carlos Apache Indian Reservation in Pueblo, Arizona. Emily was last seen on January 27, 2025, leaving her group home in Mesa, Arizona. Her remains were discovered on February 14, 2025, off Highway 60 in Gila County, wrapped in contractor trash bags. The autopsy revealed trauma to her face and head, and her hands were missing. As of now, no arrests have been made, and the case remains under active investigation. This case highlights ongoing concerns about the safety of Indigenous youth and the systemic issues surrounding missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls in the United States. Advocates continue to call for increased attention and resources to address these tragedies and bring justice to the victims and their families. Emily Pike was just 14 years old when her life was violently taken, an innocent teenager with her whole future ahead of her. She had been staying in a group home in Mesa, Arizona, part of a system meant to protect vulnerable children. On January 27, 2025, she left the facility and never returned. For weeks, she was classified as a runaway until Valentine's Day, when her body was discovered off Highway 60, nearly 90 miles away, wrapped in contractor trash bags and discarded like garbage. The details of the crime scene shocked even seasoned investigators. Emily had suffered blunt force trauma to the head and face, and disturbingly, her hands were missing. Whether this was done to obscure her identity or as part of a more sinister ritual remains unknown. The brutality of her death and the effort taken to conceal it suggests premeditation. Yet no suspects have been named, no leads publicly announced, and no arrest has been made. Emily's murder has stirred deep anger across the San Carlos Apache community and beyond. Advocates for Indigenous women and girls have long highlighted the epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous people in the United States, particularly the lack of urgency and media coverage surrounding their cases. Emily's death is another painful example, another young life lost, another family left in torment, another name added to a growing list of the forgotten. Despite national outcry, the investigation into Emily's murder remains frustratingly quiet. The FBI and tribal authorities are reportedly involved, but public updates have been minimal. With each passing day, the fear grows that justice may never come, and that her killer could still be free walking among the same roads, the same towns, unnoticed. For many, Emily Pike has become more than a case. She's become a symbol, a reminder that the most vulnerable voices are often the easiest to silence. But her story isn't over. Across social media and advocacy circles, her name is being spoken louder than ever, demanding answers, demanding justice, demanding that this time someone be held accountable. What haunts people most about Emily's case is the deliberate cruelty behind it. Wrapping a child's body in trash bags and abandoning it on the side of a highway isn't a panic move, it's a message. It's the act of someone who wanted her forgotten, dehumanized, discarded, but it had the opposite effect. The gruesome way she was found has only fueled public outrage and intensified the demand for justice. There are questions that still have no answers. Why were Emily's hands removed? Was it to delay identification, or was it symbolic? Investigators haven't shared whether DNA was recovered, whether there were signs of restraint, or whether she was killed where she was found. The silence from law enforcement has made many feel like the case is slipping into the cold arc of another Indigenous girl lost in a system that rarely brings closure. Emily's story is more than just one tragedy. It's part of a national crisis. Indigenous women and girls in the United States are murdered at rates 10 times higher than the national average. Many disappear with little to no media attention, and their cases often go unsolved. Emily's murder struck a nerve because it fit the same devastating pattern and because she was so young, so full of life, so utterly unprotected. Her community has not been silent. Vigils have been held on tribal land. Red dresses and ribbons have been hung in protest and mourning. Online, hashtags like #JusticeForEmily and #MMIW continue to circulate, keeping her name alive. Indigenous advocates have called for a federal-level task force to take over the case, citing the failure of local systems to treat these cases with the urgency they deserve. Emily Pike should be alive today. She should be starting high school, thinking about her future, not remembered as a crime scene photo or case file. Her killer is still out there free. That alone should be enough to keep this case in the national spotlight. Because until someone is brought to justice, Emily's story isn't just a tragedy. It's a warning. The group home from which Emily disappeared has come under scrutiny, with critics questioning how a 14-year-old girl could vanish without immediate escalation. Staff reportedly waited hours before notifying authorities, and her case was initially labeled a runaway situation, a label that, tragically, often leads to delayed investigations and decreased public urgency. For many Indigenous families, this is a familiar and infuriating reality. Their loved ones aren't treated as high priority until it's far too late. What stands out in Emily's case is the calculated nature of her disposal. Gila County deputies described the discovery site as remote, suggesting someone went to significant effort to hide her remains. Yet they were left just close enough to be found almost like a twisted game. The use of contractor trash bags has led some investigators to believe the killer may have access to construction or maintenance supplies, hinting at someone who blends easily into ordinary working environments. The absence of her hands remains the most haunting and unusual detail. Experts speculate this could be an attempt to remove identifying fingerprints, but this effort is rare in modern cases, especially involving juveniles. Others believe the mutilation could be symbolic, an intentional act meant to send a disturbing message or satisfy a particular fantasy. If so, Emily's killer may have done this before, or may plan to again. Despite minimal information being released, whispers have surfaced online possible connections to similar unsolved cases in nearby counties. Rumors of a suspect known to prey on young girls in the foster system, and disturbing claims from other children who knew Emily. Without official confirmation, these leads remain speculation. But they all point to one thing. Someone in Arizona knows far more than they're saying. Emily's face has now joined the growing collage of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Her photo, wide-eyed, hopeful, and far too young, circulates with the red handprint of the MMIW movement. She was more than a statistic. She was a daughter, a sister, a soul with a future. And until someone answers for what was done to her, her name should be a shout, not a whisper. Emily Pike was more than a name in a file. She was a 14-year-old girl with a story, a smile, and a future that was stolen from her in the most brutal way imaginable. Her life mattered, and yet her death has been met with silence, hesitation, and delay patterns far too familiar to Indigenous families across the United States. To let her case fade into the background would be another act of violence. One more erasure. One more girl buried beneath indifference. We cannot let that happen. Emily deserves more than a footnote. She deserves truth. She deserves outrage. She deserves justice. And until the person who did this is named, caught, and held accountable, her story must be told over and over again so the world doesn't forget her. Because the worst thing we could do is move on. This is not the end. This is the beginning of pressure, of remembrance, of justice. Emily's voice was silenced. Ours won't be.